The number 10 Montana game of all time, Joe's first comeback.
That's a great way to kick off the list.
Well, for a lot of people, that wouldn't be number 10. It would be about 2 or 3.
Until that comeback, Joe Montana was a rumor.
The 1981 Super Bowl team, I think, began with that game in 1980.
We've got a dandy for you today. The San Francisco 49ers started out very quickly with 3 straight wins, and then they lost their 8 games in a row. The New Orleans Saints, of course, are winless.
The Saints were 0-14 or something like that at the time, and they were the worst team in the league.
In 1980, nobody was paying attention to the 49ers, so they didn't count yet.
Manning, air it out again. Good protection, gives it the pump fake. He's got it. Harris, touchdown.
And when the score of this ball game is flashed around the country, there's a 4-letter word that people are going to say, WHAT. They won't believe it right
now. At the half, the 49ers trailed 35-7. Led by a second-year quarterback, no one knew what to expect.
They knew this kid had done great things at Notre Dame, and yet he's a third-round draft pick, and the 49ers just can't get over the hump, and now they're getting destroyed by the Saints.
Montana with a straight drop, and down is Darylin Moore.
Why should you think that we had any chance? In fact, we got in the locker room, and all Bill could talk about was, we expected him just to go off. But he basically said, hey, look, I can't tell you anything you don't already know. You're embarrassing yourself. And try to make this respectable.
The thing that gave me some hope was the fact that, that when we went toward our dressing room at the end of the half, our players ran as a group. So you could sense it as you went toward the dressing room that we were not a beaten team.
Montana back to throw. Big rush put on. He throws. He completes it underneath the Dwight mark. He's the 40, the 45. He's the 50. It's a foot race. Touchdown, 49ers.
That may be the one play that'll wake up the 49ers.
But that was the start of the Joe Montana legend.
Back to throw Montana. He's being rushed. Look out. He throws. He has Solomon open at the 5. Breaks the tackle. Touchdown, 49ers.
It's been a dandy, and the second half has been all San Francisco. 28 unanswered points.
Wait a minute. 35-14, 35-21. Joe Montana, he translates to the pros. This guy is magic.
It is long enough. It is good. The greatest comeback the 49ers have made as they win it by a score of 38-35.
When you think of Joe Montana, you think of fourth quarter comebacks, and that was number 1. That was his first one.
So a real sit-up-and-take-notice game that wasn't noticed by probably people around the league, 2 bottom-dweller teams, but certainly made San Francisco pay attention.
He wasn't a great player at Notre Dame just by passing through town. His greatness shows up. It showed up there, and it showed up since he's probably first put on a male supporter.
For every great quarterback, it has to start somewhere. Whenever you were down, and you kind of look at the clock, and you go, 5 minutes, 17 points, or 14, no problem. We can beat these guys. And a lot of that was born in that game against New Orleans.
The number 9 Montana game of all time. Joe beats Buddy in the House of Pain.
In the playoffs, they play a game in Houston. The Houston Oilers had won 11 games in a row. They were the hottest team in football going into the postseason. Buddy Ryan was their defensive coordinator. He was just killing teams with his blitz.
There's no reason to believe that Joe's not going to get sacked at least 8 or 9 times in this game.
1993, the Oilers were as good as any team in the league. Buddy's got the meanest, nastiest defense on the planet. They knocked 11 quarterbacks out of games that year.
One game after punching offensive coordinator Kevin Gilbride, Ryan hoped to knock out the 37-year-old Montana, who appeared to be on his last legs.
He had missed all but half a game of 2 seasons with an elbow injury. Throwing elbow. People didn't know if Joe Montana was still going to be Joe Montana. And that moment showed everyone, yeah, he's still Joe.
Joe Montana? Who's that, man? Oh, that guy's 37 years old, ain't he? We're going to take it to him today. Knockout, baby.
Back to pass, Joe Montana. Stopping, hit as it goes. A wobbly pass. It's intercepted.
Like all the great Montana games on the countdown, Our choice for number 9 didn't make the list for how it began, but for how it ended.
What made him different in the second half of the game, it's that when you broke the huddle and you came to the line of scrimmage, you saw in the other guy's eyes, they knew who they were playing, and they also knew they didn't have any chance.
Rolling is Montana. Cox is on, dumps a pass, wide open, leaping 2-hand catch made, 7-yard line by Cash. Angles to the sideline, the 5. He's in for a touchdown!
Oh, my! You see Keith Cash, he drilled that one. The bullseye was Buddy.
They led the Chiefs in the fourth quarter, just as they led Buffalo the year before, Denver the year before that. So what happens? Joe Montana's last miracle.
Montana backpedal, sets, punt fakes, there's a line drive down the middle into the end zone. Touchdown! J.J. Burton.
It was a perfect throw by Joe Montana.
They tried to blitz him, but the Chiefs did their best 49ers impersonation.
You know you won when Buddy Ryan stopped blitzing. He stopped and had to go do something else. We knew at that point that we got him.
Back to pass, Joe Montana. Looks right, arches a pass into the end zone. A backpedaling, leaping catch. Touchdown! I don't believe what I just saw. Montana Magic is back, alive and kicking in Houston, Texas.
And Montana has struck 3 touchdown passes in the second half.
And it's classic Montana, man, coming back late in the game to lead his troops to victory in the playoffs.
The number 8 Montana game of all time, Montana versus Marino, Super Bowl XIX.
That game could be a lot higher on your list. It could be in your top 3.
That might be number 2 on my list.
You got 2 quarterbacks born and raised in Western Pennsylvania.
The entire week leading in, I remember it was at Stanford, so it was essentially a home game for the 49ers. The story was not Joe Montana, the story was Dan Marino.
The biggest crowd of reporters was around Joe Montana. The question there, is Montana in any way jealous of Dolphin quarterback Dan Marino? The answer was no.
Everybody has their time, and this is his right now. He's had a great year, so didn't expect anything less from it.
I don't want to say it was, the old gunslinger and the new gunslinger, but it was somewhat of that type of situation.
In fact, we just saw it again recently when New England played Denver in the playoffs. The whole thing that week was Tim Tebow, Tim Tebow, Tim Tebow. And you got a guy who's won 3 Super Bowls, and Tom Brady, just sitting over there, and nobody seems to be paying any attention to him, and he throws 6 touchdown passes, and the Patriots kill him. This was the same thing.
The kid from Pennsylvania did not like hearing it was all about Marino. Now, he would never tell you that, but deep down inside, the competitor that he is, yeah, that was driving him that game.
Walsh came into the locker room before the game and laid down on the floor and started saying, "Oh, how are we going to ever beat Dan Marino? We can't be. We're done." Of course, classic Bill, made the team laugh and fired them up at the same time.
In our number 8 Montana game, Miami took a 10-7 lead at the end of the first quarter. But in the second quarter, Joe Cool heated up.
We wanted to stop them from running the football, and we didn't do a great job of that.
Montana drops back, short drop, fakes once. He's going to run it himself. He's into the end zone. Touchdown.
And then we wanted to contain Joe Montana. We wanted to keep him in the pocket, and we didn't do a very good job of that. He made a lot of plays throwing the football outside of the pocket, and that's the one thing that we knew we couldn't allow him to do.
While Marino struggled, Montana thrived, leading the 49ers to a 28-16 halftime advantage.
He carved up the Dolphins. He basically did whatever he wanted all day long. It was one of those games that was never really in doubt. It just felt like Joe had it under control the whole time.
The domination continued in the second half, and Montana led the 49ers to a 38-16 Super Bowl victory.
The Miami defense just cannot cope with the 49ers now.
I couldn't even tell you Joe's stats, but if he missed more than a handful of passes for that game, I'd be just amazed.
Came to see an offense and the wrong one showed up.
The guy that came out of that was going to be considered the best quarterback during that era, and then unfortunately Joe was the guy that came out.
What a bag of tricks by Bill Walsh.
Absolutely destroyed the myth of Marino as this superhuman being, because the real superhuman being was the guy in red, number 16.
I remember seeing him after the game. It was just a look of, okay, I'm still pretty good.
Montana.
Hey, Marino.
Great game, man.
Oh, thanks.
That draw play in the second quarter, great choice.
Can I buy you one?
It's the least you can do.
Here you go. Don't drop it. See you, Dan.
The number 7 Montana game of all time, the 1990 NFC Championship.
What the hell is this thing doing in your top 10?
What is that doing on here? I'm pretty sure, though, this is a celebration of Montana and all of his greatness. Yeah, I would leave this off.
Right there is a hit. Leonard Marshall coming from the backside.
Who's doing this list?
With all due respect to the fine people at NFL Films, I would respectfully request that that game be removed.
Sorry, Niner fans, but our choice for number 7 is staying put. The reason for including such a devastating loss on our list, that hit by Leonard Marshall marked a turning point in the history of Montana, the 49ers, and the NFL. San Francisco entered the game feeling pretty good about their chance to become the first franchise to win 3 straight Super Bowls.
And we'll see who has the right to play Buffalo next week.
In a game dominated by the defenses, there were plenty of bone-jarring collisions that January day.
That's what a jam on that too, okay? Keep hammering them. Keep hammering those outside receivers.
But no hit had a bigger impact than the one delivered by Leonard Marshall.
Probably the worst hit that I've had. My ribs and chest hurt so bad that I didn't know my hand was broken. But I couldn't even get a breath out. And I was thinking, oh, God, I'm going to die here. I know it.
On that one fateful play, Montana suffered a bruised sternum, a bruised stomach, cracked ribs, and a broken hand. But the most painful after effect of Marshall's crushing blow was the end of Joe's reign in San Francisco.
Montana up, but woozy.
That's how the transitional phase, if you want to call it that, was completed, is that Montana was hurt in the NFC Championship game, and I think at that point, it became Steve Young's team.
It changes that game. It ends the three-peat. I don't know how we're celebrating this as a Montana moment, but it's a significant moment nonetheless in his career.
Giants are trailing by a point. All depends on Matt Barr.
And the kick is good. There will be no three-peat.
By 1990 now, he's won back-to-back Super Bowls. Now he's the biggest icon in San Francisco sports history. The 49ers were going to win 3 Super Bowls in a row, and no team was ever going to come close to that. This was Montana into the archives forever. Lock it up. Don't want to hear any arguments. This is the greatest of all time. And instead, it was tragically and cruelly and violently taken away.
I'm sure Montana's going to love sitting down. Joe's like, oh, yeah, man, I remember that play against the Bengals. Oh, that was a great comeback, yeah, in the Super Bowl. Oh, man, I remember Dwight Clark's catch. Wait, here comes 10 minutes of me getting crunched by Leonard Marshall from behind. See ya. Gonna go make a sandwich.
The number 6 Montana game of all time, Super Bowl 24.
Our number 6 Montana game matched up 2 of the greatest quarterbacks to play the game.
Whereas Montana Marino wasn't billed as this great quarterback clash, at this point it's Montana Elway. That's legit. Everybody's ready to see if John Elway can step up and match Joe Montana.
Black 59 Razor! Black 59 Razor!
Joe and the 49ers struck first.
First drive, Montana to Rice, right down near the goal line. Boom! There's Steve Atwater. Steve Atwater's on the ground. Jerry Rice goes into the end zone. Pretty much looks like game over at that point.
Just complete control of the offense, precision, knowing where the 3rd and 4th receivers are. It's a clinic.
I love all the drama, but when you're a fan of a team, you really don't want drama.
The game that was billed as a quarterback battle turned into a one-man show. Montana threw for 5 touchdowns and 297 yards in only 3 quarters.
But down here, we went A right or C right or left, and free release, backer. I have like 2 steps on them. That middle back was slow.
It was just embarrassment of riches. And that was one of those games at halftime where I remember thinking, can we score 80?
Caught by Jones to the end zone. Touchdown.
In some ways, it was the best game he's ever played.
This was, you know, the piece de resistance or whatever. I mean, this was like from minute 0 to minute 60. You know, this was full flower Montana, decimating a defense.
Throws for the end zone. Taylor! Touchdown 49ers! Pump fake by Montana. Launches it for the end zone. Jerry Rice! Oh, what a catch by Rice!
I told you to be there. I knew it.
I mean, that was one of those, here's a blank check, fill in the blanks. I mean, the 49ers could have scored 105 points that game.
Looks over the field. Goes for the end zone. Jerry Rice! Touchdown 49ers! And the Bay Area may begin its celebration earlier than anticipated.
I don't know that football had ever been played that well up to that point.
A lot of the throws were just perfect. I mean, the guy was in a zone. We all hope, no matter what we do, whether it's sports writer or, you know, photographer or whatever, we all hope for that one moment when we can feel like we did everything right. And that's what happened to Joe.
Damn you. Congratulations for everything. What a great game.
The number 5 Montana game of all time. Chicken soup, anyone?
Sure, the chicken soup game's got to be on the list because it's where it all began.
Throughout his career, Joe Montana has been the come-from-behind quarterback for Notre Dame.
The whole country didn't know really about the legend of Joe Montana. They knew that this guy had sort of come in and made things happen and sort of looked like Barry Manilow to some people.
People go, the legend began with the catch. You know, Dwight Clark. Are you kidding me? The legend began on the frozen tundra of Dallas, Texas.
Montana's rolling and looking and keeping, and Montana lowered the shoulder and got in for the touchdown.
We do have ice storms in Dallas, and that may have been the worst ice storm that we've had here in the last 30 or 40 years.
I was behind the Notre Dame bench a moment ago, talked to Joe Montana. He says he has never been this cold during a football game in his life.
I challenge him to watch the clips of that game and not go, ooh, cold. Even if you're in Miami or Palm Beach watching Scottsdale, you put that on the DVD and you're watching, you got to go, ooh.
Montana's 23-point fourth quarter comeback outside in those frigid conditions was impressive. But the reason this game made our list has more to do with the temperature inside Joe's body.
Early in the game, I would come off the field and I'd run right to the heater and go back into the field, right to the heater. I ended up getting my temperature down to like 96. They kept me in the locker room, and they had chicken soup there to keep everybody warm at halftime, so they just kept feeding it to me and feeding it to me to get my temperature back up.
Joe Montana did not come out for the second half. The team physician just told me he has the chills. His body temperature is below normal. They're giving him warm fluids, and he may be back before the end of the game. He said it's kind of like the start of the flu.
Nobody thought he was going to play when they heard how sick he was. And Houston went out on him, dominated the Irish. And everybody thought they were dead and buried, except Joe Montana.
Now, the story about the chicken soup and how cold it was and everything else wasn't half as good as just sitting there watching the game in person.
Montana has sparked the surge of Notre Dame here in the closing moments.
A 23-point comeback in the final 8 minutes, that alone, that's astonishing. That he did it while he was sick, that's legendary. And that's a lot like the Jordan 1997 Game 5 against the Jazz, where he had the flu and dominated in the finals.
It's all come down to this. 2 seconds left to play. Houston 34, Notre Dame 28. Montana going, and it's a touchdown.
And Montana has done it again. Notre Dame completely dead, came back in the fourth quarter to win it by 1.
The image of him in college with the chicken soup and the coat on him becomes like part of the lore, kind of like Greek mythology. They do some heroic feat that lets people know that they're on the way. That would be Montana's chicken soup game. The young myth gets built.
The number 4 Montana game of all time, Super Bowl XXIII.
Joe is hot, so let's cover him
He's throwing good warm-ups. I guess that means something.
That was Walsh and Montana's Mona Lisa. Nothing better. It's #1 as far as I'm concerned.
Our number 4 Montana game featured the 49ers as a 7-point favorite, despite the Bengals having a better record.
We were on such a roll, or as good a roll as, a 10-6 team gets on, kind of like the last 2 Giant Super Bowls. Losing never entered my mind.
They completed passes all game, but the offense was sort of stuck.
For a long time, a stinker of a game. Real slugfest. You got people all over the country, what's going on here?
The ball is put down. The kick is away. It is long enough, and it is good! And with 3:20 left to go, the Bengals take a 16-13 lead.
And then the Bengals score late, and all of a sudden, whoa, the 49ers are going to lose the Super Bowl.
They got the ball, and they had to go 70, 80 yards, whatever it was, and Montana's in the huddle of the Super Bowl, and he's looking around in the crowd, and, hey, look, there's John Candy. John Candy's here at the Super Bowl. And check it out, guys. He just had a calming presence about him and calmed everybody down in that huddle, and the players believed in him.
I think it was very calculated. Don't make it bigger than it is. It's football.
The 49ers have a long way to go. Montana back to throw on first down. Throws over the middle. Completes it to Craig. Craig is to the 16.
And everybody knows about the drive, and it was so meticulous and thoughtful, and it was classic Joe.
Montana with a first down. 2 receivers near side. Joe back to throw. Steps up. Throws. Out here for Rice. He has it at midfield.
You're like, man, this guy is so cool. 3-step drop, hitting Jerry Rice. You're just sitting back and like, this guy's making it look easy.
Montana trying to drive in the length of the field here with the game in the balance. 16-13, the Bengals lead. Montana back to throw. Throws over the middle. A fine catch by Rice.
Montana just hits him perfectly in stride to the point where Rice can catch it and break the second tackle.
I think in his mind, it was just, hey, this is what I do. Everybody else was going crazy. Like, this is unbelievable. This is the best drive ever.
At the 10-yard line, 39 seconds remaining. Back to throw Montana. Steps up, throws. Touchdown! Taylor another for the touchdown. A 10-yard pass. The 49ers have scored with 34 seconds remaining.
Oh, he zipped that ball. It was so tightly thrown. It was so beautiful.
That's the epitome of the Bill Walsh, Joe Montana era, that drive. And I'm telling you, 300 years from now, it'll still be on tape, DVD, something, and people will still marvel at it.
The number 3 Montana game of all time, Joe versus Steve.
The 49ers had a great quarterback in Steve Young, but every 49er fan's worst nightmare. Joe Montana's gone, and he's thriving in Kansas City.
We got Joe! We got Joe!
The 49ers, very early in the season in 1994, are now Steve Young's team.
Joe's not our quarterback. I'm not a center no more. How's that?
But until Steve Young won a Super Bowl, Joe still owned that town.
Montana's still the best, and he always will be.
It wasn't like we don't like Steve. It was more for the memory of those 4 Super Bowls.
We love Joe Montana!
He got traded as Kansas City. Emotionally, I think there's a lot of people in the Bay Area, like, they went with him.
If you want to talk to someone who wants to play, come talk to me.
Steve was positive he was the best quarterback with our team from the day he got there. And he wasn't real quiet about it.
Joe and Steve did not like each other very much. There was not a lot of love lost between the two.
Of course, he wanted to crush him. Montana always saw Young as a threat who needed to be expunged, and he got his chance.
Everybody had it marked down as Joe versus Steve. It was 2 good teams, 2 playoff teams that year.
I'm sure that Steve looked at Joe to see if Joe was acknowledging him, and I'm sure Joe wasn't. To Steve, Joe was saying, hey, game on.
High formation play fake by Montana. Wants to throw wide open. Joe Valerio has a touchdown.
I think you can see it in that reaction. He wants his win today.
While Joe enjoyed some sweet success in the number 3 game on our list,
back to throw is Montana. Fires for the end zone. Keith Cash. Touchdown, Kansas City.
his counterpart was left with a much more sour taste in his mouth.
Young will throw. He's being rushed. He's headed the end zone. He's headed the end zone. It's a safety. Derek Thomas nailed Steve Young.
I think Steve Young tried to force that one to Jerry Rice. Steve Young has really had a scramble to stay away from constant pressure.
That was the best team of the decade for the 49ers. They won the Super Bowl later. They only lost 3 games. One of the games they lost was at Arrowhead to Joe Montana.
This game means so much to Joe Montana. You know, I mean, he can play it down and not talk, but I know Joe Montana.
You could make the argument that if he maybe was honest about this, he would rank that victory maybe even the equal of anything he did in the Super Bowl.
On his list, I gotta think outside of winning a championship game, that one might have felt pretty good.
The number 2 Montana game of all time, the 1989 Eagles game.
There are so many, and obviously the big games, the Super Bowls, the playoffs, clutch. But the one that really resonates with me was the Philadelphia Eagles game.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is Joe Starkey at Veterans Stadium in Philadelphia. Is this the team of the 80s against the team of the 90s today?
Concentration will win this game for us, man. These guys are not better than us. So what? They've been in the Super Bowl. So are the Redskins. It's time to go out and kick some work on 3. Work on 3. 1, 2, 3. Work!
People don't understand the overtones that preceded this game. The 49ers are the defending champions, but Bill Walsh is gone. It's 1989.
It's going to be a good game. They're 2 good teams. Got beautiful weather. What the hell, you know? Somebody going to win, somebody going to lose. I mean,
they had pulled out 2 games to start the season under George Seifert, but the Eagles were the it team. That whole city and team was geeked up, and this was going to be the changing of the guard game. And that's how it played out in the first half.
In the first half, Montana was sacked 6 times.
That Philadelphia Eagles defense might have been the best defense in history of the league.
They're playing a Philadelphia team on that horrendous artificial turf that might as well have been just concrete painted green.
Joe Montana just got pummeled over and over.
Chased again, caught and dropped. It's Clyde Simmons.
I would run a route, 10-yard route, turn around, I'd be open, and there'd just be a huge pile up. I'd look, I go, where the heck is he? Unburying himself from, 5 defensive players.
That's a safety.
Things were so bad that 49ers offensive line coach Bob McKittrick went to Joe Montana at halftime and apologized.
I set up a pitch, and he kind of slid, and I got washed off of the other.
It was stunning because everybody in the press box had counted the 49ers out of that game. But we all forgot who was the quarterback of the 49ers.
At halftime, they knew they couldn't survive, so they spread them out and went to 4 wide. Well, that's counterintuitive. They're killing Joe Montana, our fine china. Let's take a back out of the backfield and run a spread offense so they can kill him even more. But what Holmgren knew is that not only is Montana tough enough to stay in, but if you give him a little bit more space, he might pick you apart.
2nd and 23. Taylor, when you're playing with Montana, you know something great is going to happen.
I know there was a few times in the huddle where he told those guys they better stink and block because we're not out of this thing.
Montana to throw. He's got Rathman. He's into the end zone. Touchdown 49ers.
You know, you could say, hey, man, we're on the road. We're down big. Chalk this one up to an L. Let's go home. Go win the West. Don't worry about it. No, by McKittrick saying that to Montana at halftime and by Montana kind of coming out and doing what he did showed that incredible resolve and the physical toughness.
In the fourth quarter alone, Joe passed for 4 touchdowns and accounted for 246 total yards.
There's this weird buzz in the stands, like, wait, what's going on? But we could still come back. And they run a play action. You see Jerry Rice going deep, and you knew this is the I'm Joe Montana and you're not play.
Montana to throw. He wants the end zone. Rice has got it. Touchdown 49ers.
All those players were far physically tougher than they got credit for. And that game, Joe showed it in its finest fashion.
It's interesting that you have it as 2 because I've always thought it's an underrated Montana game. Apparently now it's overrated.
I have a number 1 just because of the beating he took.
And now, the number 1 Montana game of all time, the catch.
We all agree what number 1 on this list is.
The catch game has to be number 1.
The outcome of a Super Bowl berth hangs in the balance.
When you think of Montana, you think of the catch. It's got to be number 1.
It's a madhouse at Candlestick.
There are few games, if any, in NFL history which were as seminal. You had essentially the end of the Landry Cowboy era and the start of the Walsh 49er era.
Look at Montana. And why not? He went 90 yards.
It has to be number 1, even though it wasn't his greatest statistical game. It was certainly symbolically the greatest game of his career.
Montana setting up to throw deep. Throws it high. Down in the corner. Emerson Walls takes it away from Freddie Solomon.
What is often forgotten about our number 1 Montana game is that Joe's career masterpiece was clearly a work that could only be appreciated after viewing its final act.
It certainly wasn't his best game. He threw 3 picks. They turned it over 6 times.
We fumbled the ball. We had interceptions. We had sacks. It wasn't really pretty, except for that last drive.
And they marked the ball down at the San Francisco 11. That's how far they have to go to win.
Well, at that point, Montana had done the Saints comeback. He'd done the chicken soup game, but this is the Dallas Cowboys. They knocked the 49ers out of the playoffs in 70, 71, and 72. Can Joe Montana actually drive them all the way down?
That game is about the defining moments of the last 2 minutes. Who is this guy, Montana? I'm John Wayne, and John Wayne never loses.
It's 3rd and 3 from the 6. San Francisco has never won a championship in professional sports.
58 seconds left.
We're going to call a sprint option. He's going to break up and break into the corner. Okay, you got it? The right will clear.
Montana lines up at the 5. And on 3rd down and 3, he rolls right looking to throw. He throws into the end zone.
As a 49er fan growing up, you're thinking, just get rid of the ball. Just give us one more play. He releases the ball, and it's just, oh, thank you. We have one more chance. And then a blur. Shouldn't be there. Down comes Dwight Clark, and football changed forever.
There's all sorts of myths surrounding that stuff, you know. Did Dwight know that that pass was going there? Was he throwing it away?
No matter what anybody says, if you talk to all the Cowboy players, they will tell you he was throwing that ball away.
If you don't get what you want, you'll just simply throw the ball away.
It sure looked from the sideline like he was just getting rid of the ball, because they were coming.
Sorry, Dallas Cowboy fans, he wasn't throwing the ball away. He was throwing the ball where only Dwight was going to go up and get it.
Here's Montana finally throwing the ball away. Clark makes a leaping catch.
No, they practiced the play, they'll tell you.
We had practiced this play so many times, I knew exactly what Joe was trying to do. When we practiced it, Joe would always throw it either too low or, way over my head. But in the game that sends you to the Super Bowl, he puts it in the exact spot where it has to be.
You know what? It doesn't matter. All that matters is that Dwight Clark was in that moment, at that place, and made that catch.
There's so many great Joe Montana moments to choose from. The catch is number one. The catch will always be number one.
Because of all the things that he's done, all the great plays and all the comebacks, Joe Montana is the greatest quarterback that I have ever seen play the game of football.
When you did what he's done, and we've all watched him, I'll say it with no disclaimer, this guy's the greatest quarterback that ever played the game.